A new report from Punchbowl News says that Amazon is looking to avoid the blame for raising prices as a result of President Trump's new tariff.
The largest e-commerce empire in the world, Amazon began abandoning the United States as a supply hub, shifting $13 billion in imports within just 60 days. This quiet retreat was sparked by tariffs that sent shockwaves through the global economy, disrupting supply chains and rewriting trade rules. It is not a simple story of business adaptation, but a wholesale transformation of economic power, with consequences stretching from foreign factory floors all the way to your doorstep. Join us as we expose the hidden crisis reshaping America's economy and what it means for your wallet and your future. The tariff trigger. On April 2, 2025, President Donald John Trump signed an executive order invoking the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. The declaration was framed as a bold move to increase our competitive edge, protect our sovereignty, and strengthen national and economic security. For corporations dependent on global supply chains, however, this was the starting gun of an economic maelstrom. Within hours, hundreds of tariff categories went live, hitting goods imported from China with levies that often doubled or tripled their cost. For Amazon, this was not a theoretical policy shift. It was a strategic nightmare demanding immediate response. The company reacted swiftly, almost violently, tearing apart established logistics routes, shredding contracts, and rerouting shipments away from traditional hubs. Items that once traveled directly from Shenzhen factories to Los Angeles docks were now routed through Vietnamese ports and shipped onward to Mexico for distribution within the Americas. This strategic pivot was not about geography alone. It was a tactical maneuver to dodge tariffs, preserve margins, and sustain supply amid rapidly changing trade policies. The speed and scale of this shift stunned industry observers. Complex supply chains, optimized over years, were dismantled and rebuilt within weeks. Now, let's pull back the curtain on Amazon's quiet recalibration, revealing not just a trade workaround, but a systemic shift with global consequences. Behind the curtain, Amazon's strategy. Amazon's chief executive officer, Andy Jassy, addressed investors with calm assurances, emphasizing careful cost management and steady consumer demand. Yet behind the scenes, the operational reality was anything but calm. The company scaled down direct import operations from China, preferring to shift procurement and assembly offshore to countries with lower or no tariffs. Vietnam, India, Malaysia, and Indonesia rapidly emerged as new manufacturing hubs, places where factories could produce goods without suffering the punitive tariffs that throttled direct shipments from China. Simultaneously, Amazon opened fulfillment centers along Mexico's northern corridor, positioning itself to capitalize on the new flow of goods transiting Mexican ports into the United States. This geographic redistribution was a clear signal of systemic retreat rather than resilience. President Trump's repeated promises of bringing jobs back and reshoring American manufacturing rang hollow in this context. Inside Amazon's logistics empire, no new factories were opening on American soil, and the promised jobs simply did not materialize. Amazon's internal shift wasn't the end of the story. In its wake, a vital segment of its ecosystem was already collapsing, and few saw it coming in time. Collapse of Amazon's haul section. The consequences of Amazon's strategic retreat were visible in its marketplace ecosystem, particularly within the so-called haul section, a collection of sellers and goods competing with rapidly growing rivals, such as Temu and Shein. The new tariffs hit this segment with brutal force. The de minimis loophole, which allowed goods valued under $800 to enter tariff-free, was eliminated. This small but vital exemption had been the lifeline for many small-scale sellers, predominantly based in China, who supplied Amazon's vast inventory. Once removed, the cost of doing business soared. Chinese sellers reported cancellation rates exceeding 85%. For many, the collapse was swift and terminal. Orders vanished, contracts evaporated, and the flow of goods ground to a halt. The implosion of the haul section was no isolated incident. It symbolized a broader rupture, threatening to unravel Amazon's supply chain fabric. The ramifications stretched far beyond suppliers to impact workers, consumers, and the broader economy. This disruption set the stage for deeper challenges ahead, as the very infrastructure supporting trade began to strain under the weight of these seismic changes. As Amazon's silent exodus unfolds, the consequences are no longer confined confined within the company's walls. Visible cracks have started appearing in America's trade infrastructure. Ports slowing to a crawl, rail lines rerouting, warehouses sitting half empty. The echoes of this retreat reach far beyond e-commerce. What happens when the largest importer in the United States turns its back on the country? The answers lie just beyond the docks and warehouses, in a crisis unfolding silently, but with devastating economic impact. The story of supply chain disruption is far from over. Now, how is this corporate retreat triggering an unprecedented meltdown of America's trade infrastructure and the ripple effects that threaten to upend the nation's economic future? West Coast ports in crisis. An unprecedented event shook the West Coast ports of the United States. Over a recent 12-hour period, no cargo vessel departed from Chinese ports destined for the major harbors along the West Coast. This silence marked a disruption not witnessed since the height of the pandemic. The absence of shipments was a stark indicator of a shifting global trade landscape, driven by mounting tariffs and geopolitical tension. The Port of Los Angeles, the nation's busiest, experienced a significant decline, with cargo volumes dropping 35% compared to the same period the previous year. This steep fall rippled throughout the San Pedro Bay complex, where 70 scheduled sailings were canceled through the end of the month. Shipping companies, facing softer demand and escalating operational costs, responded by scaling back their services. This contraction in activity raised alarms among local politicians and port authorities, who condemned the tariffs as reckless policies threatening the economic vitality of the region. These West Coast ports channel nearly 40% of the nation's imports, making their stagnation a concern not only locally but nationally. Ports were the first to falter. Soon the collapse spilled across highways, railroads, and warehouses. The infrastructure that powered America was buckling in real time. Look, we followed Amazon's trail across 4 continents, exposing how tariff policy rewired global trade in 60 days. If this gave you the clearest view yet, pay it forward. Subscribe and help power independent reporting. The economic scale of the collapse, following an unusually heavy front-loading of shipments earlier in the year. The Port of Long Beach braced for a substantial drop in cargo volume, projecting a decline of 30% in the coming weeks. The port's role extends beyond its docks. It supports 2.7 million jobs nationwide, spanning a broad spectrum of industries, from dock workers and truck drivers to warehouse employees and retail staff. Collectively, the Los Angeles and Long Beach ports handle nearly half of the country's imports, serving as the vital arteries that sustain the American consumer market and manufacturing sectors. The downturn in cargo flow threatened to erode this support structure, casting uncertainty over millions of livelihoods. Industry experts warned that without adjustments to trade policy, this erosion could accelerate, undermining national economic security and the country's competitive position on the world stage. Breaking down the transport network, the effects of the crisis extended beyond port operations into the broader transportation network. Norfolk Southern, a major rail freight operator, announced the cancellation of 20 intermodal trade lanes connecting West Coast ports to East Coast markets. These cancellations reflected declining cargo volumes and the mounting inefficiencies brought about by trade disruptions. The trucking industry faced similar difficulties. With fewer containers arriving at ports, truckers found reduced workloads, leading to layoffs and diminished hours. Warehouse facilities operated at diminished capacity, intensifying the strain on supply chain resilience. Meanwhile, freight routes shifted geographically. Rail lines increasingly diverted from traditional West Coast corridors toward Texas, where customs brokers in Laredo managed doubled cargo volumes. This rerouting added layers of complexity and cost, but became necessary to avoid tariff hurdles and port congestion. To survive, companies began charting new routes, away from tradition toward uncertainty. Those moves reshaped geopolitics and triggered responses few expected, emerging alternative routes and political response. As traditional supply routes faltered, new trade corridors began to take shape. Amazon accelerated the expansion of its fulfillment network in Mexico, anticipating increased cargo flows through northern ports. This rapid growth exceeded prior expectations, signaling a strategic commitment to circumvent tariff-affected pathways. Vietnam emerged as a key focus area. Representatives from the Northwest Seaport Alliance actively engaged Vietnamese port authorities to secure increased cargo volumes. Similarly, efforts to strengthen trade relations with with Cambodia and India gained momentum, alongside explorations into new energy cargo opportunities. These diversification efforts reflected a strategic pivot to reduce dependence on any single region. Amid these developments, West Coast political leaders issued urgent warnings. They cautioned that without tariff relief or negotiated trade agreements, the economic damage could rival the devastation caused by the recent global health crisis. Small businesses faced closures, workers confronted job losses, and regional economies braced for prolonged hardship. Senator Patty Murray articulated these concerns, stating that current administration policies risk steering the nation toward a painful recession, undoing years of economic progress and stability. The deterioration of America's trade infrastructure is a story that extends beyond statistics and shipping manifests. It is a tale of communities, workers, and families facing uncertainty as the backbone of the economy weakens. Idle ports, empty warehouses, and silent trucking lanes signal a supply chain under unprecedented pressure. Now the focus shifts from infrastructure to the human stories behind these figures. Small business owners, workers, and entrepreneurs find themselves caught in the crossfire of tariffs, forced to make difficult decisions as margins shrink and operations falter. Their struggles reveal the true cost of the ongoing trade disruption, far beyond the balance sheets. The devastating impact on people will highlight just how urgently solutions are needed. So let's explore these personal narratives and the broader economic ramifications. Small business catastrophes. Emily Lay runs a modest stationery business that once thrived by offering thoughtfully designed products to a loyal customer base. Since the tariff escalations began, her operation faces a crushing burden: an anticipated $630,000 in additional fees over the next 12 months. This staggering sum threatens not only her profit margins, but the very viability of her company. Her story echoes throughout countless small enterprises across the nation. Take candle manufacturers, for example. A domestically produced candle jar can cost upwards of $12 each. Meanwhile, a 15-pack imported from China might cost $20 before tariffs. After levies, that same cost can surge to $40, pricing many American consumers out of the market. For small businesses, these soaring costs translate into impossible choices: raise prices and lose customers, absorb costs and shrink margins, or shutter operations entirely. Even everyday essentials become unaffordable for many Americans. The price of American-made work boots has climbed to $400, while imported alternatives can cost half that amount. Zooming in on the ground level, we meet the entrepreneurs now stuck between soaring costs and dwindling margins. Their choices are narrowing by the day. Stories from the supply chain front lines. Sarah Wells, owner of a company that produces breast pump backpacks, experienced the harsh realities of tariff enforcement firsthand. Recently, she faced an unexpected customs duty increase amounting to $15,000. The tariff rate had jumped from 24% to 54% overnight, blindsiding her business and disrupting cash flow. Such stories are far from isolated. Numerous small business owners describe a retreat into survival mode, shrinking product selections, freezing hiring, halting advertising, and pausing growth initiatives. The unpredictability and rapid escalation of costs force many to abandon expansion plans and focus solely on day-to-day operations. The chocolate industry too feels the pinch. Zocolal, a small American chocolatier, now pays an additional 10% tariff on imported cocoa beans. While this tariff raises production costs, it does nothing to stimulate domestic cocoa farming, which remains virtually non-existent. As competition intensifies, expansion halts, and staff reductions multiply, the structural limits of survival begin to take shape. Scaling challenges and worker impact. Small businesses generally lack the resources to swiftly shift supply chains. High labor costs within the United States compound the challenge, making domestic sourcing prohibitively expensive. While larger corporations might absorb these expenses or automate processes, smaller firms often cannot, resulting in heightened vulnerability. Margins are squeezed painfully tight. Many businesses cannot fully pass increased costs onto consumers without risking sales losses, forcing them to absorb tariffs and fees that erode profitability. This financial strain leads to difficult decisions, including workforce reductions, inventory cutbacks, and even business closures. At the same time, the human toll extends to workers on the front lines of supply chains. Charlie Camacho, a longshore worker from a family with 3 generations employed at the ports, now faces uncertainty as cargo volumes diminish. Empty dispatch offices and reduced work hours have become common sights, leaving families anxious about the future. Port workers, truck drivers, warehouse employees, and logistics personnel collectively face layoffs and diminished job security. Consumer confidence soon reflected the damage. What people feel in their wallets now matches what businesses see on their ledgers. Consumer sentiment crashes amid inflation fears. The economic strain on businesses and workers reverberates throughout consumer confidence. Recent surveys reveal consumer sentiment plummeting to 50.8, marking the second lowest reading ever recorded. This drop reflects growing anxiety over inflation, job security, and economic stability. Year ahead, inflation expectations rose sharply, reaching 7.3% from 6.5% just a month earlier. The increase signals widespread concern that prices for everyday goods will continue to climb, eroding purchasing power for families across the country. Tariffs play a significant role in this sentiment shift. Nearly 75% of consumers spontaneously mention tariffs when discussing economic concerns, up from about 60% in previous months. Faced with rising uncertainty, businesses are scrambling for stability. But how are they trying to adapt in a system shifting under their feet? Immediate coping strategies. In response to these pressures, businesses adapt by streamlining operations and reassessing supply chains. Many owners communicate more transparently with customers, explaining price increases as necessary responses to rising costs. This honesty helps maintain trust even as products become more expensive. Some companies seek professional advice to navigate complex customs procedures and tariff regulations, aiming to minimize exposure and maximize efficiency. Financial planning also becomes critical, with many establishing lines of credit as emergency funds to weather cash flow disruptions. Transparent pricing remains a cornerstone of customer relations. Businesses emphasize the quality and uniqueness of their products, encouraging consumers to understand the value behind rising costs. Short-term fixes only go so far. The focus should be on the deeper structural roadblocks stopping companies from reshoring or reducing reliance on imports. Alternative sourcing reality. Despite the challenges, relocating supply chains domestically remains largely prohibitive for many firms. 57% of surveyed companies cite cost as the most significant barrier to reshoring. High labor expenses and infrastructure limitations compound the difficulty of rebuilding manufacturing bases on American soil. Skilled labor shortages further hamper reshoring efforts. 21% of respondents identify the lack of qualified workers as a primary challenge, while only 14% cite taxes as the biggest obstacle. These findings reveal that workforce issues often outweigh fiscal concerns in decisions about supply chain realignment. Automation offers a partial solution. Nearly half of companies express preference for investing in automated technologies rather than expanding human labor if reshoring occurs. Despite potentially doubling operational costs, automation promises improved efficiency and reduced vulnerability to labor market fluctuations. The cumulative effect of these dynamics paints a stark picture of America's small business landscape. Margins shrink, jobs disappear, consumer confidence falters, and the once reliable supply chains buckle under the weight of tariffs and global trade realignments. The story of economic transformation does not end here. Expert economists and policy analysts are sounding alarms and projecting scenarios for the nation's future that demand close attention. These broader economic implications will shape how the United States navigates recovery and growth in the years ahead. So now let's explore the expert analysis and future projections that contextualize these individual stories within the larger economic framework. The coming chapter will reveal the fiscal, monetary, and international trade forces that will determine America's economic trajectory. The reckoning has just begun. Academic and Federal Reserve insights. Recent research from the Yale Budget Laboratory reveals the full extent of tariffs' impact on the United States economy. The price level resulting from all tariffs enacted through April 2, 2025 rose by an estimated 2.3%. This seemingly modest figure translates into a staggering average loss of $3,800 per household annually, underscoring the real-world burden imposed on American families. Lower-income households bear the brunt of this increase, with estimated annual losses of $1,700, thereby worsening the existing economic inequality within the country. The sectors suffering the most include clothing, textiles, and apparel, where prices have surged by approximately 17%. The inflation in everyday essentials such as clothing deepens the financial strain on consumers who already face rising costs across a broad range of goods and services. These price increases ripple through to retailers and manufacturers, squeezing margins and threatening the viability of numerous businesses. In response to these developments, the Federal Reserve adjusted its economic outlook. For 2025, it raised the inflation forecast by 0.3 percentage points, now expecting an inflation rate of 2.8%. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell has publicly acknowledged that tariffs contribute significantly to inflationary pressures. He cautioned that these trade-related costs are likely to delay progress in bringing inflation down to target levels. As official projections worsen, the private sector starts bracing for impact. These are the most sobering warnings from Wall Street to Main Street. Private sector forecasts and industry impacts. Economic forecasters in the private sector echo and even amplify these concerns. Capital Economics projects the Consumer Price Index to peak near 4% in 2025, a sharp increase from 2.4% earlier that year. Goldman Sachs anticipates the Core Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index to accelerate to 3%, surpassing previous forecasts by half a percentage point. These rising inflation indicators reflect the persistent and broad influence tariffs exert on consumer prices, consumer spending, and overall economic health. The impact extends deeply into key industries. Builders estimate that tariffs will add approximately $9,200 to the construction cost of an average new home. Such increases have significant implications for housing affordability and the broader real estate market. In the automotive sector, tariffs are expected to raise vehicle prices by $4,000 to $12,500, depending on the model and type of automobile. This inflation threatens to reduce demand, extend supply chain bottlenecks, and complicate production planning. Consumer electronics have thus far enjoyed a temporary reprieve, thanks to exemptions on phones, computers, and related products. Nevertheless, officials from the United States Department of Commerce have indicated that future tariffs could soon extend to the semiconductor sector. Such measures threaten to disrupt production further and increase costs for electronic devices that are critical in both consumer markets and industrial applications. Global dynamics shift in response. Nations realign, trade routes evolve, and the old supply chain model fractures into something unrecognizable. Global trade shifts and long-term impacts. International responses to United States tariffs have been swift and strategic. China, rather than conceding, has aggressively rerouted exports through alternative markets, establishing new trade agreements with Europe, Africa, and South America. These moves not only undermine the intended economic leverage of United States tariffs, but also strengthen China's foothold in emerging and established markets. Chinese exporters have increasingly shifted production and shipping through countries like Vietnam and Malaysia to circumvent tariff barriers. This strategic diversification reflects the adaptability of global supply chains and highlights the limitations of protectionist measures in a highly interconnected global economy. For many companies, the traditional China-centric supply model is giving way to more dispersed, flexible networks that seek to minimize tariff exposure. Domestically, projections suggest that the United States' real gross domestic product growth will be approximately 0.9 percentage points lower due to the cumulative effects of tariffs. The economy is expected to remain persistently smaller by 0.6% compared to a scenario without these trade restrictions. While tariffs are projected to generate around $2 trillion in government revenue over the next decade, this gain comes at the cost of diminished overall economic output and reduced growth prospects. For households, the financial impact is palpable. Imposed and scheduled tariffs amount to an average additional tax burden of nearly $1,200 per household in 2025, functioning effectively as a regressive consumption tax that disproportionately affects lower-income families. Look, the dust hasn't settled. Far from it. Now we face the question that no policy paper dares to ask. What if there's no going back? Uncertainty and the road ahead. Uncertainty remains a dominant feature of the current economic landscape. Many economists and supply chain experts question the permanence and sincerity of current tariff rates, suspecting they may primarily serve as negotiation tactics rather than long-term policy fixtures. This ambiguity hampers effective business planning planning and long-term investment, as companies find it nearly impossible to develop reliable mitigation strategies amid shifting trade policies. This pervasive uncertainty has fostered hesitation among investors and corporate leaders. Capital expenditures are delayed or canceled as firms await clarity on future trade relations and tariff structures. Without confidence in policy stability, businesses become risk-averse, further slowing economic growth, job creation, and innovation. The risk of recession looms large. Surveys of supply chain professionals indicate that 63% anticipate a recession affecting the United States economy within the near future, citing tariffs as a significant contributing factor. Approximately 51% of respondents expect a contraction in consumer spending in the coming quarters, a projection that could exacerbate economic stagnation. Tariffs have fundamentally altered the logic underpinning global supply chains. Previously designed to maximize cost efficiency and operational effectiveness, these networks are now fragmented as companies seek to navigate new barriers and uncertainties. The era of low-cost, streamlined global sourcing faces profound disruption, with firms increasingly relocating production to low-tariff regions across the globe. This globe-hopping approach to supply chain management underscores the limitations of traditional protectionist policies in an era of complex international commerce. The transformation witnessed in the supply chain landscape began with Amazon's quiet pivot, but has since exposed a broader restructuring of global economic architecture. The American Apparel and Footwear Association warns that prolonging or intensifying the trade war risks inflicting irreversible damage on manufacturing sectors, supply chains, and consumer markets. The fundamental question facing the United States is no longer whether supply chains will recover. It is whether they will ever return to what they once were. Years of disruption have exposed the fragility of globalization as we knew it. Tariffs, trade wars, and strained alliances have not only slowed the flow of goods, they have redefined the very architecture of global commerce. American firms, once dependent on just-in-time delivery from overseas factories, are now scrambling to regionalize operations, shorten production timelines, and re-establish control over critical inputs. Meanwhile, emerging powers are building parallel systems, creating a fractured, multipolar trade world. This is not a pause, it is a pivot. So here's the question. If the old supply chain model is gone for good, what replaces it? Who adapts, and who gets left behind? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you're finding value in this level of analysis, consider subscribing. It's the best way to stay ahead while others are still catching up. Thanks for being part of the conversation.